Right?
In addition to from yesterday, some more details?
Yeah, really. I was asked mainly to fill out some of the logistics sort of details, some of the basically what resources are required to set these things out, how much they cost, and I thought I'd give you some examples of data as well, just to whet your appetite. So I'm going to just review again what the aspiration of the project is. Describe the equipment in a bit more detail and the logistics involved, how awkward are these things to get deployed on ice shelves. And again, just run over a little bit more detail about the progress to date, and maybe if I've got time, just show a little bit of data. And plans for the future. And then also the kind of models that we might imagine for people getting involved. This is really early days. Actually, this is entirely sort of unfunded as such. It's kind of done in spare time at the moment. So what we're looking to do is get some funding, and we can sort of generate sensible models for more involvement. It's kind of happening slightly ad hoc at the moment. So again, the aspiration, contemporaneous time series, we want to get as many of these things out on ice shelves for so pretty much with as much temporal overlap as possible. It doesn't have to go on forever, it just needs to go on for a few years. We just need something which gives us a little bit of inter-annual variability in melt rate time series from ice shelves to provide a resource for modelers. And then these monthly melt rates would then become available, hopefully through a portal, through the SOOS portal or some other way, so that modelers can get a hold of them and test their models of ice shelf ocean interaction. And then, like I mentioned yesterday, the idea is to sort of sub-select a few of these that we kind of like, the locations that seem to work well, and attempt to maintain them out into the future. The ones near bases, for example, would be relatively easy to do. So what does it look like? It's that the actual instrument itself is that yellow box on the Nansen sledge there. This actually pictures from Wolfgang Rack, who's you probably might recognise McMurdo ice shelf there, white and black island in the background. He's wrong one. That red basically there's just a battery inside an ice box, just to keep it insulated. But these antennas, we've got two antennas, we've got cables, we've got the instrument itself, and we've got a battery. That's basically what it consists of. Right, the question about the antennas. These are quite big, expensive antennas, these things. They're collapsible. They collapse down to a really easy package to carry, but they're relatively expensive and very robust. And the idea is that if you're going to go to many points on an ice shelf, this is an example from Craig Stewart's work. He basically went and visited all these locations. These are flow lines on the Ross ice shelf. All these locations once, and then came back a year later and revisited them. And from that, he got a very nice mean melt rate for this region, a mean melt rate for the year. If you're doing that, then you want your antennas to stay the same. You don't want them to be distorted or damaged, so they need to be pretty robust. If you're going to leave them in sort of necklace style would be to leave them at one location, and he left one out at Coolman High, just here near the ice front. In one location, you don't need expensive, robust antennas. You can almost use disposable ones, and we've got a design for a kind of a disposable one that's here. It flat packs down. Takes about 10 minutes to put together in the field. It's used as Corex plastic, corrugated plastic boxes, and the idea is that you can bury it. Because it's kind of inside the box, it keeps the snow out, which means the properties don't change as the season wears on, and they can be left out. We've had them left out for over a year now, and they're doing fine, even as they get buried. And they're basically pretty cheap, and quite lightweight. And again, if you're going to put out several of these instruments, you don't want to be spending a huge amount of money on. I mean, those other heavier antennas, they cost about sort of £3,500 for the two of them, which isn't that far off the cost of the instrument. These things cost about £100 each. They don't really weigh much on the budget. So the radar itself, it's phase-sensitive radar, which gives us the resolution, gives for signal to noise ratio of around about 7 dB, gives us about a little bit better than a millimeter resolution in range. They are relatively robust and simple to use. I sent one of these out to Wolfgang, as I said, Wolfgang Rack on McMurdo Ice Shelf. He basically, everything went wrong with the transport, and he received it kind of in his tent. He'd never seen it before in his life. He received it in a sheet and a little sort of kind of manual, so to speak, and had it up and running pretty much straight away. So they're pretty easy to use. And as I say, they can be left unattended. There's the option for possibility of attaching GPS and Iridium to it. It's you have Iridium communications that enables you to keep an eye on it and to modify the characteristics during the season if you so desire. Again, they're quite lightweight, and at £5,000, I mean, they're less than the cost of an acoustic release, which is my normal sort of metric for costs, is how much does an acoustic release cost and how much these things cost. An example for some data, this is from Craig's data at Coolman High. The two lower panels are from oceanographic instruments that were put in there by their kind of courtesy Mike Williams, in fact, these two panels. The bottom panel is speed from an aqueduct, just measuring currents just below the ice base. And then there are two temperature records there, are yellow and black, from the sort of two aqueducts quite near the ice base. And the top panel is the melt rate as observed by the radar. So it's by no means constant. It obviously varies hugely, loads of variability, which is not really that surprising because you've got a lot of variability in the speed and the temperature, and the speed and temperature is obviously what drives the melt rate. So basically you get a very highly detailed picture of what's happening. As you can see that it's peaking up to well over 20 meters per year melting, although the average is just over 1 meter per year at this location. And just as another example, that was for a year. That was a year-long time series. This is about a month-long time series just before that previous one. And it shows, again, a little bit more detail, some of this sort of very strong variability, pretty much following the speed and temperature variability. One particular reason I wanted to show this is because it actually demonstrates at one point where the temperature went to just below the freezing point. This is the in situ freezing point here at the ice base. We can see that it basically got cold enough for some freezing to take place. So we've actually got congelation ice forming at the ice base here for a very short period. 14 hours of freezing, up to half a meter per year peak freezing there, and it deposited in that period 0.44 millimeters of ice. Now 0.4 millimeters of ice is a relatively small amount. It's not particularly geophysically significant, but it does demonstrate the capability of the equipment. You can start to see that sort of change, then you pretty much got your monthly melt rates fairly well covered. So practicalities of deploying these things. There's the yellow box in a hole about 1 meter deep, just to keep the worst of the winter cold wave out. A plywood sheet is a sensible way of working. It sits beside the battery beneath the plywood sheet, and just fill the hole above. Antennas to either side, separated by a few meters. Markers just so that you know where the antennas are. And if you install it, there's a mast here. It's some simple mast with the very small Iridium and GPS antennas mounted on the top. The whole installation, when I put a few of these in at the end of last season, and each one takes about half an hour to an hour to deploy. So they're not particularly onerous to install. So where are we at the moment? I showed this yesterday, a little bit more detail here. So this is the Arion, the Kopri and Sweden Bergen as a group are putting 10 to 15, I think, around about there, of these instruments in the sort of Amundsen Sea sector this coming season on Getz Ice Shelf and others in that area. but we at BAST are deploying 15 over the Filton and Ronnie ice shelf this coming season, and Australians are deploying several on Sawsdell and well, hopefully Totten. I'm not sure about Totten, but certainly Sawsdell ice or glacier. And Slavik Tulichik from the US is putting in one in this area here, just near the grounding line of Ross Ice Shelf. So the red dots, actually I'm not sure that one is there now, Mike can correct me, but I suspect that's now been taken out. But there are 3 in this area here on Pine Island Glacier. There are 3 in a little cluster here, put in last season on Ronnie Ice Shelf. And there are a couple on Amory, and there's one up on the Rabois Ice Shelf up, put in by Frank Patton. So we've got a kind of a start. It's all a little bit ad hoc at the moment. People putting them in for their own reason, all sorts of different reasons, glaciological or oceanographic reasons they're being installed. But they can all contribute to the sort of beginnings, this sort of embryonic necklace concept. The 15 we're putting out over the Ronnie and Filchner ice shelves are going to be deployed more in the sense that I had anticipated for the program, in that we're going to be selecting locations where they can effectively advise models as best they can, advise to improve models and to validate models of ice-ocean interaction in the southern Weddell Sea, as part of a major project we've got going with the Germans over Filchner ice shelf. So again, the list, as we said, as I showed yesterday, a list of involved and interested nations or groups. As for the participation, I think the aim of Necklace and overall is to support groups for whatever reason they want to deploy the instruments on ice shelves, is to support them in any way we can by providing the instruments and providing any assistance they need in analysing and interpreting the data. Like I said, they'll be putting them out for their own particular reasons, but that's kind of the aim. And I think if we make it easy for people to put these things out, I think I personally think they've got huge possibilities. And if we can make it easy for groups to put these things out, then I think that we'll get keep it as cheap as possible, make it as easy as possible. Then we'll get a lot of them out, and gather a great data set that'll then become available to the rest of the community. So I'll take any questions. You've got time?
Yeah.
We were looking at some of the EODs that were stuff. Well, it's mostly ice shelf ones, things like velocity and stuff like that. Is there any way we can collect some of that information at the same time? I mean, for example, I can see we can get velocities from GPS, Necklace and body. Other stuff that we got.
Yeah, I mean, the ancillary data sets that we pick up as a matter of course when we get these data are essentially glaciological ones. So we can certainly get ice velocity from just the practical business of the GPS. I mean, the GPS communicates that information back to us so that it makes it easier to go and pick the things up. If you're flying around trying to find them, it's a lot easier if you know exactly where they are. But I think that mainly the ancillary data tend to be the glaciological ones. So for ice velocity we certainly get, but ice velocity we can do really well from satellites, in fact. There's vertical strain rates and compaction rates, which are very good for interpreting other sort of satellite-type data sets that we kind of primarily recover with this system.
I can do one more, yes, Steve. Are there any technical issues with putting in an area where marine ice is free?
If these are only any use for melting zones, if you have actually ice being accreted through frazzle ice being deposited at the base, you'll never get any return at all. There's active accretion, not a chance. No, it's got to be melting zones.